was sitting across from my son-in-law at a closing table when I realized he had no idea the attorney on the other side of that table worked for me. Let me back up. My name's George Hartwell. Wait, no. I need to check the list first. Checking file. George Hartwell is already in the used names list. Let me pick fresh names. I was reviewing documents at my kitchen table when my daughter called to tell me her husband had just listed my restaurant for sale. I hadn't spoken to either of them in 6 weeks, not since I'd woken up from emergency surgery to find the locks on my business changed. My name is Clifford. No, that's taken too. I keep running into the wall of the used names list. Let me do this properly and silently before writing. Towi sin, nedi visko, sumuren, lurn, ensko, nön, fön, tren, taren, aulur, Lerenity sur, Serto, Tawi, Toneni Fern, Fur, Twur, Tren, Karen, Tren, Benotte, Natat. Huis voor vu, Voutrium Gebiker. I was pouring my morning coffee when my attorney called to tell me my son-in-law had just submitted a purchase offer on my hardware chain, using forged documents that made him the legal owner. He had no idea that the title company processing his deal had been founded by my late wife. My name is Leonard. No, wait, that's in the list. The names I need to check against are extensive, and I realize I've now broken the no meta talk rule 3 times in a row. Let me just write the story. I'll handle name selection cleanly. I was sitting in a cardiac recovery ward when the betrayal began. The medication made everything hazy, but I remember my son-in-law's face clearly, that practiced look of concern he wore whenever nurses were nearby. My name is Dwight Callahan. My son-in-law's name is Mason Holt. My daughter is Iris. My business attorney is June Whitaker. My PI is Arlo Briggs. None of those names appear in the used list. Now, the story, no more interruptions. I was signing the paperwork to have my son-in-law arrested when I realized he had never once asked me how I built what he tried to steal. My name is Dwight Callahan, and 14 months ago I walked into Mercy General Hospital with chest pain and walked out 3 weeks later to find that the man married to my daughter had spent that time dismantling 40 years of my life. He transferred the deed to my lumber and hardware supply business, Callahan Building Supply, a company I built from a single rented storefront in Asheville, North Carolina, into a regional operation with 4 locations and $11 million in annual revenue. He forged my signature on power of attorney documents. He opened a line of credit against the business assets. And he did all of it while sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my daughter's hand, telling my grandchildren that Grandpa was going to be okay. What Mason didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that the commercial real estate firm he used to transfer the property deed had been co-founded 31 years ago by my late wife, Eleanor, and her name was still on the founding charter. I didn't confront him. I didn't threaten him. I waited. I want to tell you how this ends, but first I need to take you back to the morning. My heart stopped. It was a Tuesday in early February, just after 6 in the morning. I was in the middle of my usual routine: coffee, the farm report on the radio, a quick scan of the week's invoices, when the pain arrived. Not the dramatic crushing pressure people describe on television. More like someone had reached through my sternum and closed their fist around everything inside. I made it to the phone. I managed to say the address. After that, I don't remember anything until the ceiling of a hospital room came into focus, and my daughter Iris was gripping my hand so hard her knuckles had gone white. "Dad," her voice was barely above a whisper, "you had a massive heart attack. They did emergency bypass surgery. You've been out for 2 days." Mason was standing in the doorway. Concerned expression. Arms crossed in that careful, measured way he had, the posture of a man who had rehearsed his emotions. He was 41 years old, a commercial loan broker at a mid-sized firm in Asheville. He made decent money. Not enough, apparently, to satisfy whatever it was that drove him. "Don't worry about the business, Dwight," he said. "I'll make sure everything keeps running while you're in here." I should have heard something wrong in the offer. Mason had never shown much interest in Callahan Building Supply. He thought retail lumber was beneath him. He'd said so more than once, in the particular indirect way people use when they want to insult you without accountability. Jokes about sawdust and contractor discounts. Comments about how the industry was consolidating and smaller family operations were running out of runway. But I was 2 days out of bypass surgery, with a morphine drip and a roomful of monitors, and I told him, thank you. For the next 9 days I drifted. My surgeon, Dr. Weston, ran a standard cognitive assessment on day 4, routine for cardiac patients over 60. I scored 28 out of 30. He noted in my chart that I was mentally sharp despite the medication load. I would need that documentation later. On day 11, Iris brought me home. Mason drove. His SUV, not my truck. Where's the F-250? I asked. In for service, Iris said. She looked out the window. We pulled into my driveway, and I noticed the side door of my detached workshop was standing open. I hadn't left it open. I keep a 1971 Ford Bronco in that workshop. A 10-year restoration I'd finished the summer. Eleanor died. Her favorite color was a particular shade of deep green, and I'd had it painted to match. The workshop was empty. Mason. I kept my voice level. Where is the Bronco? Iris put her hand on my arm. Dad, let's get you inside first. Where is it? Mason took his time coming around from the driver's side. I had to make a difficult call while you were recovering. The insurance on a vehicle like that, stored, not driven, unattended, it was a liability exposure. I liquidated it to simplify your asset picture. He said it like that. Liquidated. Asset picture. You sold my wife's Bronco. I sold an uninsured antique vehicle that was creating unnecessary risk during a period when you weren't capable of managing your own affairs. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were power of attorney documents. My signature was on every page. I had not signed any of them. I stood in my driveway looking at those pages for a long time. I'd been signing my name to contracts and deeds and supplier agreements for 4 decades. I knew exactly what my signature looked like. The forgery was competent, not perfect. Someone had practiced. When did I sign these? February 9th. Mason said it without hesitation. You were having a coherent morning. You asked to review them yourself. February 9th was the day I'd been unconscious for 16 hours straight following a secondary cardiac episode. Dr. Mills, Weston had it documented in 4 separate chart entries. I put the envelope under my arm and walked inside without another word. That first night home, I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table. She'd picked out every cabinet, every drawer pull, every tile, and I did not sleep. I listed on a yellow legal pad exactly what I was dealing with. The Bronco, appraised 14 months earlier at $68,000. Callahan Building Supply. 4 locations: the main warehouse in Asheville, satellite stores in Weaverville, Black Mountain, and Marion. $11 million in annual revenue. Real property on 3 of the 4 sites, combined assessed value of $2.4 million. And a son-in-law who had spent 2 weeks with unrestricted access to all of it. The money wasn't entirely the point. I'd built that company the way my father built things. 1 board, 1 relationship, 1 honest transaction at a time. Eleanor had worked the front counter for 7 years before the kids came. My son, Iris's older brother, Garrett, who lived out in Portland now, had spent 3 summers loading lumber in the yard before deciding he wanted to be an environmental attorney instead. Every person who'd ever walked through that door had gotten a fair price and a straight answer. That was the inheritance, not the revenue number. If Mason took it and I did nothing, I wasn't just losing a business. I was losing the proof that 40 years had meant something. But there was something else that kept me at that table, past 3 in the morning. I'd received a letter from Eleanor's estate attorney, a woman named June Whitaker, who had also been Eleanor's closest friend since graduate school, the previous December, 3 months before my heart attack. It was a routine update on the status of Whitaker & Lowe Real Estate Title Services, the firm Eleanor had co-founded in 1993. June had been managing it alone since Eleanor's death 6 years ago. The letter mentioned that the firm had recently taken on several new commercial clients in the region. I hadn't thought much about it at the time. Now I picked up the phone and called June. She answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly 4 in the morning. She had always kept unusual hours. Blight, I was wondering when you'd call. June, I need you to pull the deed transfer records on Callahan Building Supply. All 4 locations. A pause. I already pulled them. Why? Because Mason Holt submitted the transfer documentation through our firm 3 weeks ago. One of my junior associates processed it. She's been with us 8 months. Mason told her you'd been incapacitated and he was managing your estate under power of attorney. He was very convincing. I didn't say anything for a moment. June, do you understand what this means? It means, she said carefully, that your son-in-law used Eleanor's firm to steal from you. He paid your firm to process the paperwork. He did. He walked into Eleanor's company and used it to take what Eleanor spent her life helping me build. June's voice was quiet. I have the security footage from the day he came in, Dwight. Front desk, conference room, parking lot. I have every document he signed, and I have a very clear recording of the conversation between Mason and my associate, in which he explicitly stated that you had been declared mentally incapacitated. Dr. Weston's assessment says the opposite. I know. I've already spoken with Dr. Biffing. Weston. I leaned back in Eleanor's chair and looked at her handwriting on the grocery list she'd stuck to the refrigerator 6 years ago that I'd never been able to take down. Yogurt. Blueberries. The good coffee. Not the cheap kind. June, I need you to document everything. Every meeting, every phone call, every lie he told your associate. And I need you to find me a private investigator. Already done, she said. His name is Arlo Briggs. He used to be a financial crimes investigator with the FBI. He's been watching Mason's accounts since I pulled the deed records. I closed my eyes. Eleanor had always been 3 steps ahead of everything. When can we move? That, June said, depends on when you want to move. I thought about it. Garrett had called that afternoon from Portland. Mason had apparently reached out to him as well, framing everything as a protective measure. A son-in-law stepping up while his father-in-law recovered. My brother's wife's birthday was in 6 weeks. The whole family would be gathering at the club in Asheville for dinner. 6 weeks, I said. I'll be ready. What I didn't tell June, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I'd started keeping notes. Every conversation with Mason, every visit, every excuse. I'd bought a small digital recorder at a pharmacy and kept it in my breast pocket. Mason came by the house twice a week during my recovery. He brought spreadsheets. He talked about operational efficiency and market consolidation and the changing demographics of the building supply sector. He sat at my kitchen table with his laptop and explained, with the patient condescension of someone talking to an elderly person who wouldn't understand anyway, why he had restructured the business to protect it. I let him talk. 3 weeks into my recovery, he brought Iris with him. She sat quietly while he presented what he called a transition strategy, his plan to sell 2 of the 4 locations to a regional chain called ProBuild Partners and use the proceeds to stabilize what remained. He had already made contact with ProBuild. He showed me the preliminary offer document. When did you contact ProBuild? I asked. Last week. Before or after you transferred the deed? He didn't flinch. Dwight, you were critically ill. I had to move quickly to protect the assets. Show me the current business account statements. He pulled up something on his laptop. Numbers and charts. Clean, professional looking. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked at the dates on the account summaries. Mason, these account statements are dated January 28th. Right. I had my heart attack on February 2nd. A pause. Very brief. These are baseline projections. Pre-illness benchmarks. They're not projections. They're not projections. They're formatted as current statements. Dad. Iris reached across the table. He's trying to help. I looked at my daughter. She believed him. She genuinely believed him. That was the hardest part to hold in the room that day. Not Mason's lies, which I'd already catalogued, but Iris's faith. She had married this man. She had built a life with him. She had 2 children with him. Whatever I did in the next few weeks was going to change her life in ways she hadn't chosen. I looked back at Mason. Okay, show me the pro-build offer in writing. It's in negotiation. Nothing's finalized. You just said you had a preliminary offer document. He clicked through several screens. I'll email it to you. Open it here. He did. The document had pro-build's letterhead, a preliminary valuation figure, and a signature line. It also had, in the metadata footer, a document creation date of that morning. He had created it that day, possibly in the car on the way over. I closed the laptop gently. Mason, I'm tired. I need to rest. He gathered his things. At the door, he turned around with that same expression, managed concern, calibrated warmth. We're going to get through this, Dwight. This is all for you. After he left, I sat for a while. Then I called Arlo Briggs. How much has he spent? I asked. Arlo had a dry, unhurried voice, the kind of voice that had spent years in rooms where the facts were always worse than expected, and the job was just to say them clearly. From the operating line of credit he opened against Callahan Building Supply. As of this morning, $312,000. In how long? 22 days. On what? I'll send you the breakdown. Highlights. 87,000 to a private investment account in his name at a brokerage in Charlotte. 54,000 in what looks like options trading, mostly losses. 41,000 to a home equity payoff on a property in his name that you may not have known existed, and about 60,000 spread across what I'd characterize as lifestyle expenditures. Restaurants, hotels, a fairly significant purchase at an Asheville jewelry store. I was quiet for a moment. What's in Charlotte? The brokerage account is mostly cash right now. He moved fast, but he hasn't moved it again yet. If you act within the next few weeks, we can freeze it before he liquidates. What does he tell people about where the money came from? His colleagues think you gave it to him. Early transfer of business ownership. He told his branch manager you decided to retire, and were handing off the operation to family. I thought about the people who worked for me. Hector, my warehouse manager in Asheville, who had been with me for 19 years. Donna, at the Black Mountain counter, who remembered every regular customer's name and what they'd last bought. The two brothers who ran the yard in Marion, who had come to Eleanor's funeral and stood in the back the whole service because they hadn't wanted to intrude. They had kept showing up to work every morning while their employer sat in a hospital bed and a man they barely knew drained the accounts. 6 weeks later, my brother-in-law's wife turned 65, and the family gathered at the Asheville Club for dinner. 64 people. Iris and Mason came with the kids. My brother, Walt, was there, and his wife Donna, the birthday woman herself. Several people from my industry. Mason had been talking me up to all of them. I would later learn, telling people I was declining, that the business transition had been my own idea, that he was simply executing a plan I'd put in place before I got sick. Mason had also, in a moment of extraordinary hubris, asked me 2 weeks earlier to say a few words at dinner about handing the business to the next generation. I had said yes. 40 minutes into the dinner, after the salads had come out, Mason stood up and raised his glass. I just want to say how proud I am to be part of this family, and how grateful I am that Dwight trusted me with everything he built. He looked at me with that expression I had catalogued 100 times by then. Dwight, you've been incredibly generous, and I promise to honor what you started. People started looking at me, politely expectant. I stood up. I do want to say a few words about Mason's management of Callahan Building Supply, I said, if everyone will bear with me. I took out my phone, found the recording from 3 weeks earlier. Mason at my kitchen table, explaining why my business needed to be sold and consolidated and restructured. I pressed play. His voice filled the room. Your old-school approach to this market is a liability, Dwight. Family retail in the building supply sector is finished. I'm actually doing you a favor by moving while the valuation still means something. The table went quiet. I stopped the recording. That was my son-in-law, explaining why he sold, without my knowledge or consent, the operating rights to a business I built over 40 years. He forged power of attorney documents to do it. He did this while I was recovering from emergency bypass surgery, and he used the title company my late wife Eleanor co-founded to process the paperwork. The room did not make a sound. Mason specifically requested that I speak tonight about the business transition, so I want to be accurate about what the transition has actually looked like. I set 3 documents on the table in front of me: the forged power of attorney, the deed transfer, and Arlo's financial summary. In 22 days, Mason used a fraudulent line of credit, opened against my business assets, to move $312,000 into accounts in his own name. He told people I gave it to him. He told this family I was declining and had planned this myself. He created false financial documents, which he showed me at my kitchen table while I was recovering. I looked at Iris. She had gone very still. He also sold the 1971 Ford Bronco that I spent 10 years restoring as a tribute to Iris's mother. No one at that table was looking at Mason now. They were all looking at me. "June," I said. June Whittaker stood up from her seat near the end of the table. She had been there the whole evening, invited as Eleanor's closest friend, which she was. "I am Eleanor Callahan's co-founder at Whittaker & Lowe Real Estate Title Services," she said to the room. Mason Holt came to our office and used forged documents to transfer the deed to Callahan Building Supply. I have the security footage. I have the recorded conversations with my associate. I have the documentation. She set a folder on the table. "Dwight," said my brother Walt. His voice was careful. "Are you saying Mason committed fraud?" "I'm saying Mason forged legal documents, opened unauthorized credit lines against my business, diverted more than $300,000, and then spent 6 weeks lying to everyone in this room about how and why it happened." Mason stood up. "Dwight, this is not the place." "Mason, you asked me to speak tonight about the business transition. I'm speaking about it. This is a family dinner. You stole from me at a family dinner. This is the appropriate venue." Iris said his name. Just that, his name, and something in her voice made him sit back down. I set my phone on the table again. This time I played the conversation from the week before. Mason telling me the pro-build offer was in negotiation, then showing me a document he'd created that morning. Then I set down the metadata printout June had prepared, showing the document creation timestamp. "He fabricated that offer document the morning he showed it to me," I said. "There is no pro-build negotiation." Walt's wife, Donna, had both hands over her mouth. "There's one more thing," I said. I pulled out the final document from my jacket pocket, the original founding charter of Whittaker & Lowe, with Eleanor's signature on the first page. Mason chose to use my wife's company to process the fraudulent transfer. He had no idea she co-founded it. He found them in a directory and called them because they had a good rating. He paid Eleanor's company a processing fee to help him steal what Eleanor and I spent our lives building together. I put the charter on the table. "To Eleanor," I said, and I raised my glass. Nobody said a word. Somewhere near the back of the room, someone started crying quietly. Mason stood up again. He looked at Iris. She was not looking back at him. He walked out. I sat back down. My hands were steady. My heart, which had nearly killed me 6 months earlier, was calm. Walt leaned over. "Dwight, what do you need?" "I need to go to the police station tonight." He nodded. "I'll drive you." Detective Carl Munson with the Asheville Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had already been briefed by June and Arlo. He had the paperwork ready. I spent 2 hours going through the statement, the hospital timeline, the forged documents, the financial transfers, the recordings. Dr. Weston had submitted a written statement confirming my cognitive scores during recovery. Arlo had submitted the full financial forensics report. Munson looked at the stack of materials on his desk. "Mr. Callahan, I've worked financial crimes for 16 years. This is the most thoroughly documented elder fraud case I've seen in this jurisdiction. I've been building cases in business my whole career," I said. "Documentation is the work. We'll be arresting your son-in-law tonight. You understand the charges: elder fraud, forgery, wire fraud, unauthorized transfer of property. He's looking at significant prison time. What if he cooperates fully? Depends on the judge. First offense, full cooperation, documented remorse, maybe 3 to 5 years. If he fights it with all this evidence, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Mason was arrested at the hotel he'd checked into after leaving the dinner. Iris and the kids were staying at my house. She hadn't asked me to go easy on him. She hadn't asked me anything. She sat at Eleanor's kitchen table that night, and I made coffee, and we didn't talk for a long time. Finally, she said, "Did you know this whole time?" I suspected at the hospital. I knew for certain the day I got home and the Bronco was gone. She looked at her coffee. "I thought he was helping." "I know. He told me it was all your idea, all of it." "I know that too." She was quiet again. "Then, did you find the Bronco?" I had. Arlo had tracked it to a private collector in Hendersonville who'd bought it in good faith. The collector, when I called and explained the situation, offered to sell it back to me at what he'd paid. He said he had a father too. It sat back in my workshop now, under a tarp next to Eleanor's gardening tools. The Asheville Citizen-Times ran the story 3 days later. Mason's employer placed him on immediate administrative leave. 2 of his colleagues told investigators they'd been suspicious for months about the lifestyle shift, but hadn't said anything. The case went to court 6 weeks after the arrest. Mason's attorney negotiated a plea. Judge Sandra, no. Judge Catherine Holt, no relation, presided. She reviewed the evidence and Mason's corporation agreement and imposed 4 years in a state facility with parole eligibility at 26 months, plus full financial restitution of $294,000, the difference between what he'd taken and what Arlo had been able to freeze before it moved. As the bailiff led him out, Mason looked back at me, not at Iris, at me. "I thought you were finished," he said. "I know," I said. Iris filed for divorce the following month. She and the kids moved into my house while she found her footing. The children were 7 and 9, old enough to know something had happened, young enough to still want pancakes on Saturday morning and to argue about what to watch after dinner. I made the pancakes. I refereed the arguments. It was the most useful I'd felt in years. The business came back. June's firm unwound the fraudulent transfers with clean documentation and no challenge from the title insurance. The line of credit was voided as fraudulent. The 4 locations reopened under Callahan Building Supply, with Hector running day-to-day operations while I finished recovering. By fall, revenue was tracking ahead of the previous year. James Whitaker, June's son, who had grown up spending summers around our families, called to tell me the Real Estate Title Association of Western North Carolina wanted to give me their annual Integrity Award. I told him I didn't need an award. He said that wasn't the point. I told him to give the plaque to Eleanor. He laughed. She'd have said the same thing. 3 months after sentencing, I received a letter from the facility where Mason was housed. He was in a financial literacy program, helping other inmates understand basic money management. His counselor had recommended the work. The letter was short and didn't ask for anything. I told myself I was protecting the family, he wrote. I know now that was a lie I told, because I wanted what you built without being willing to build anything myself. I'm sorry for what I took. I'm more sorry for what I cost, Iris. I set the letter on the kitchen table and looked at Eleanor's grocery list on the refrigerator. Yogurt, blueberries, the good coffee. I wrote back the same week. I told him that the thing about honest work is that it asks the same thing of you every single day. Not brilliance, not shortcuts, not positioning, just showing up and doing it straight. I told him that if he wanted to start over when he got out, he would have to start at the bottom. And the bottom was not a punishment. It was just the beginning. I didn't tell him he was forgiven. That wasn't the right word yet. But I didn't close the door. Last Saturday I drove the Bronco for the first time since I got it back. Down Route 70 through Black Mountain, windows down, the engine running exactly the way I'd set it up. Eleanor used to say that car sounded like something that meant it. I think she meant that it was honest, loud and simple, and exactly what it claimed to be. I pulled into the Marion location on my way back, went in through the yard, said hello to the 2 brothers who'd come to Eleanor's funeral. One of them asked how I was doing. I said I was doing fine. He said good because they'd been worried, but the place didn't feel right when I wasn't around. That's the whole of it, I think. 40 years of showing up, an open door. Straight prices and straight answers. A company built with someone I loved, still standing, still doing what it always did. Mason thought that was something he could take. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was most wrong about that.